All right, let's go. Let's do this.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Founders and Friends podcast. I'm your host, Riley Rosebee. Today, I am thrilled to have Mr. Howard Lindzon, founder. Are you still the CEO at Stock?
I am today, yes. Never know.
There
Day
we
to
go.
day.
As of today, as of this moment, founder and CEO of StockTwits, Howard Lindzon. Howard, thank you so much for coming on here. Part of why I wanted to talk with you today is you are an innovator in your own right. You helped innovate the Cashtag. And I'm curious if you could walk me through that moment, kind of period in time. We're coming out of the great financial crisis. I've heard the stories about you guys using Twitter, kind of seeing how the markets are all coming together. But what was like the light bulb moment with the Cashtag specifically where you wanted to formulate this idea of StockTwits around it?
Well, it started with, you know, uh, hey, Riley, it's nice to see you. It started with YouTube and was just disgruntled hedge fund investor. You know, the market, the first internet was not as cool to me because it was, most of the products were like DOS, in the investment space, everything was kind of DOS based. And so the internet comes along and, is clunky. And, I kind of wasn't involved in that first, you know, kind of boom. I was just trading the markets. I was more on the hedge fund side. So it wasn't like I was an internet native person. And, you had the crash. I'm going to crash. And coming out of the crash, or the internet bubble crash, coming out of the crash, YouTube kind of came down, and it's more of a creative person. I was disgruntled at that point, but I'm still being a hedge fund manager. And YouTube comes out, and I'm like, geez, like I mean, as someone who's a geek, not a geek, but a media hound, I was like, and everybody was posting cat videos. It wasn't really, people weren't using it in the way that, well, I mean, it was a new format. So it was a lot of people just turning their cameras on their cat or filming their television and sharing it with the world. So kind of like AI at the beginning, people were just making, videos or repair. So I created a show that on YouTube. The idea was to create CNBC on YouTube. So this is the first iteration of finance television on the internet. And I started a show called Wallstrip that was acquired by CBS. And while I was working at CBS, Twitter came out. This is about 2007, and Twitter launched. And I'm working at CBS. They're paying me, and I'm like, fuck. Twitter is the thing, right? YouTube was the thing for me to like create a show, and it was acquired by CBS, but like Twitter really spoke to me in the sense of like real-time communication. And as a retail investor back from the Yahoo Finance days, I was like, my goodness, this is like going to change people communicate. I was flash forward to today in 2026, and the president is finally launching the idea that I originally had that Twitter would be, is that, if you could, the president's going to tweet and the markets are going to move, and today, the president going to sell his true social feed, supposedly a pre-feed to his thing. So, only 20 years later is this happening. So Twitter the president is doing the business model that Twitter should have had. Anyway, so Twitter comes out. I'm goofing off on Twitter, and this is great. It's going to be the bloom. And I was, and back then it was the BlackBerry. There was no iPhone, so it was just desktop Twitter and the BlackBerry. And I was sending messages on Twitter, talking about stocks, etc., and using the hashtag, I guess, GOOG or AAPL or BlackBerry RIM. I think it was RIMM, and those were the tickers. And I realized that there was so much spam in the Cashtag because, people would tag, I went to the market to buy a green apple. It just was a mess. And so I had this idea to put a dollar, tickers are in 4 letters and 3 letters. And I had this idea instead of the hashtag, I created the dollars and said, let me see for the link with a cash tag. And so I sent the first cash tag, I think it was $ RIMM to Fred Wilson, and said, I'm buying some RIM. And Fred, who's a venture investor and was an investor in Twitter, sent me back, said, this is genius. You should start a company. And kind of that's how it came about. I don't know if it was Chris Corvo who called it the cash tag but Twit team up hashtag. And I don't know, millions and millions of cash tags now are used. Probably the greatest thing I've ever done that no one knows about, in that you know that it still exists. Elon killed hashtag because of his spam, but he can't kill the cash tag. And even now, Robinhood and Twitter use the cash tag, and now it links to tickers. So they're only 20 years late. The thing about like cool stuff is you just don't know when it's going to take off. And, um, you know, so that's the origin story of the cash tag. So I don't know if we could have trademarked it or done something with it. At the time I was told we couldn't. I don't know if that's bad legal advice, and now it's everywhere. Yeah, I don't think 8 to 80 ever caught on. I think some of the stuff that's caught on for me is, social relative strength that you and I worked on, and the degenerate economy. The 8 to 80 stuff was really my idea of, an evolution of, let's say, um, when you go to a mall or and see products that resonate with you. But mainly it was the idea that there's certain companies whose products appeal to 8-year-olds and 80-year-olds, and before technology, that would have been McDonald's. Um, there's a pre-internet world, now AI world, where there was no tech. Growth companies were restaurants, like Starbucks, Blockbusters of the world, and McDonald's. So those were 8 to 80 brands. You went to a Blockbuster if you're an 8-year-old, and you went if you were an 80-year-old. Same with Starbucks, than ever actually, and companies like McDonald's. But then the internet came along, right? And now we have these internet brands that are like timeless, like Apple and Google. I would say even Netflix. And as that, but it's not as simple anymore as just 8 to 80, right? There's so many to 80 brands that it's very hard. You can't just loop McDonald's and Starbucks. These companies aren't growing at the same rate, so it's not as simple as just finding an 8 to 80 brand. Um, the A recent example of an I think that's a stretch. I think just certain categories now, like drones, robots, aviation, so many categories now in defense, which, I'm not an expert in any of this stuff, so I think it's just its own category. I think OpenAI or Claude could be 8 to 80 products, right? If you had figured it out early. When it came out, 8-year-olds were using it and 80-year-olds were using it in the first month. Right? So I think they jumped the shark there as a recent thing. But no, drones is separate than than, model airplanes. And, I think there's the early public companies in this space. I think the innovation right now is in the private markets, right? A lot of companies are getting started in the aviation space, the drone space, et cetera. So it's still early days. I think in the financial world, 8 to 80 is predictions, right? Like stocks, you couldn't trade to your 18. I think, I think predictions kind of jumped, has moved betting to, to, to the category of 8 to 80. I don't think 8-year-olds are betting, but they will be. They'll figure out ways to get on. Well, they will be. My son's on Raya. I'm like, listen, how are you on Raya? Like you're unemployed, right? Raya was supposed to be for, millionaires and supermodels. And my son, I said, Raya doesn't work if you're on Raya. And no offense to you. So, but prediction markets, um, are probably the closest thing to really kind of like OpenAI is this 8 to 80 markets. That's why it's exploding. And I call this whole area that I'm focused on right now the degenerate economy, which is this basket of, you know, I have a Robinhood account. The World Cup game's about to start. I can just, you know, I can just open up the Robinhood app, place $50 on a game, and boom, right? So there's this whole new category of betting that I think, good or bad. I mean, it is betting, it is not investing, but the whole entertainment part of as Americans have more free time, right? There's no ending this amount of free time we're going to get from technologies. So we could argue all day about income and like how people are going to be paid, but the new free time is going to be, betting and entertainment, and content. And betting markets are like the perfect, monetization for good content. So I'm very excited about that space. The problem is I'm not a bettor at heart, but I think the UI products and the fact that they are in many ways news is incredible. The other thing about bets that's interesting, and again, we're just at the early stages. Even though Kalshi and Polymarket have been around for 7, 8 years, um, I'm seeing some of my favorite investors. I feel like but I also think some of my favorite investors continue to make bets in this space, some of the most successful investors. So I think at many levels, we're in the very early stages still of this speculation. I call speculation as entertainment and degenerate economy, um, because the rest of tech has moved to real tech, right? Like now that anybody can start podcasts, can distribution, um, and we've seen it like in the horror movies, like these 19-year-old directors being discovered by A24 or YouTube stars going direct to theaters with horror films and doing 200-300 million in revenue, right? So we are in this Mike Latler just called it hourglass economy, where you have massive companies, right? And, for 20 years, everybody wanted to be Mark Zuckerberg. I think we're in this hourglass economy is like you've got to be insane if you want to be Mark Zuckerberg, right? You should be on the bottom half of this hourglass where the most businesses are being started, like you're starting your business and really try and find your niche and really kind of bootstrap this thing and live within your means. And you can build a great business with 2, 3 people. You can build a 10 to $20 million business with 3 or 4 people. And I think as people learn to live within their means and realize that we're in an hourglass economy and that there's this bifurcation where the big just keep getting bigger and, I don't know how to stop it. You can yell at the machine or you can try and survive. And, but there's never been a better chance for people in the hourglass economy to kind of just start this business and kind of eke their way forward using all the tools. So that being said, I'm very focused, still on StockTwits community, and I'm very focused on, um, people becoming better investors. And betting is just another way to onboard people to this world of investing. Betting is betting, but eventually people get sick of it and realize they can index or they can put money into the market and find mentors and kind of start saving and build a nest egg. So, it's an exciting well, not sometimes. Anybody who invests, including myself, every 2, 3 years, 5 years at the beginning, yeah, eventually you're gonna blow up an account, right? The best time to blow up an account is when you have very little money, and it may mean you take 2, 3 years off, or it may mean you get right back in action, but, the best thing that can happen to you is is obviously a win, we're seeing it right now in semiconductor. A lot of people have big wins, and now they're gonna see what it's like to have, a 50% drawdown or a 70% drawdown, and some people, never come back to the game, and other people, take it as a lesson and realize, they get smarter from it. So and in as America kinda loses its place, I mean, we could argue about politics all we want, but America is losing there's a new world order forming, right? And, it'll take if America is going to resume dominance, and I don't think they care about it. I don't think, the Democrats might, I don't think they know how to go about doing it, and Europe's got their own problems, and Russia's got their own problems. So in this era of, um, a new world order, the greatest American export and the greatest American industry, our Disney of 2026 is the markets, right? We can make fun of it and we can say it's, of no value. People can just not be involved in it, of course, but there is no bigger American culture. Hollywood's gone. McDonald's has lost its luster. Starbucks has lost its luster. Disney has lost, in many ways, its luster, including America, in many ways, has lost its luster to people around the world. But the markets have never been more interesting to the world, right? Now you have tokenization of securities. Everybody wanted SpaceX. It wasn't just Americans that wanted SpaceX. It was people in Kenya. It was people in Malaysia. So American companies, the American markets, uh, the exchanges, and now it's like CBOC in New York Stock Exchange. It's now pushing on polymer. The exchanges are exploding and being disrupted. So I'm very bullish on, obviously the cash tag is still in its early days because prediction markets and markets themselves are expanding at a rapid pace. We're going to have hundreds more public companies. We're going to have, 10 to 20 blockchain where people can exchange money and get online from anywhere in the world. So this is one of the most interesting times. Now, if you're not in the markets and you're not a small business, um, and you think you want to be an investor, the puck move, right? You now, because of semiconductors and AI, um, and because of the new world order, it's technology is moving much more to like space, defense, robots, like nuclear, geothermal. And so the venture capital, the allocation of capital, uh, in my opinion, is a little more interesting. Like venture capitalists investing in apps was not really, in that whole ZERP era. I mean, we got Uber, we got Airbnb, we got Twitter, we got stuff like StockTwits. But most of the SaaS stuff that was created is just not that valuable as we're seeing, and AI is disrupting it. So as AI kind of disrupts software, and this kind of boom or this bubble in AI kind of plays out, what's left after this AI bubble is just another layer or this whole new version of the internet, which is just incredible. But venture capitalists have moved their capital. It's much bigger venture capital funds and much bigger bets, and they're much more about bigger ideas, right? And they're going to be very local, right? U.S. is going to have their own space program, their own defense program, and all in Ukraine, because of the war in Ukraine. Ukraine's kind of the leader in drones, right? Drone technology, and the Middle East is going to be reshaped by drones, right? Like it won't be, you know, uh, be a different way. Israel has the Iron Dome, but is the Iron Dome going to work against drones from Hezbollah or Hamas? So no matter how mighty Israel seems today, because of the Ukraine-Russia war, Hezbollah and Israel's enemies are going to have a whole new way to fight. And so technology is kind of pushing in that direction, and that doesn't interest me as much. So I'm kind of triple down, leaning into U.S. markets. Yeah, I'm not a geek or a early adopter. I'm what you call a trend follower, like you, Riley. We went to ASU, so we're like bottom of the barrel. I mean, it's hard for the West, but it's still bottom of the barrel. So you have to know this is nature. I talk about nature a lot, right? There's nature, right? 200 years ago, born the way I look today, I'd be dead, right? I'm not a man of strength. I'd be dead. So, first guy, they'd send me in first to take a bullet or a sword to the head. Um, but strength has been replaced by machines and brains and creativity. Um, and so look, 60 years old, and I've made something of myself in an era that 200 years ago I would have been dead. By the time I was 20. So you got to realize where you are in that thing. So you're laughing, but you and I are kind of humble about this stuff. We're very lucky to be born into this era where hunting and gathering and strength wasn't wasn't the thing that mattered. What mattered was, networks and mobility and creativity and your deep expertise. And so, for me, I think how I look at new technologies is I have a circle of people that I trust, right? For me, Michael Perek, Fred Wilson, uh, and a few other investors and traders that I follow who have a history of you know, I have this group that I look in and upon to see if how things are correlating amongst a group of people that I know play with all new technologies, right? And and it's like the shark and the pilot fish, right? Like you're either a great white shark and you kind of roam the oceans, and maybe that's a Mark Andreessen or a Fred Wilson. And in my industry, every industry has them. Uh, and how I decide if a technology is inevitable is I kind of check the group that has a history of being right. And the other place where that has a history of being right is the markets, right? Price action. Stocks at 52-week highs and all-time highs. So you're looking for confirmation amongst like a group of people that invest very early, and then you can look for confirmation in the public markets, right? Like space stocks started a rally 2 years ago, and did we knew and top, well, maybe not top, but like top short term when SpaceX happened. Those space stocks were running because it was a way to own SpaceX before SpaceX. No one had to worry about the fundamentals, right? And then they started believing their own bullshit and then realized SpaceX isn't even worth what it could be worth. So why would these companies be worth? So I'm saying if you watch certain people that you build a network with on Twitter and in the private markets and StockTwits, and then you watch the public markets, you can kind of pick up on these things without being an expert. So now there's false signal because certain VCs get hyped about everything because that's their job. And so you got to be careful of like false prophets and false signals, right? And not be trapped too late in a trend like enterprise software. But AI gave many indications of why it was going to be different. In the crypto era, no matter how much people talked about crypto and laser eyes and whatever, no one got a wallet. For all the press and all the knowledge and all the amount of people working on crypto, I don't fucking use it, right? And AI was the opposite. ChatGPT came out and there was no marketing and hundreds of millions of people were using it. So so you have to really be careful when you're thinking about tech and trends of like what's hype and what's not. And generally the users kind of are the indicator, right? And ChatGPT became an 8 to 80 product. My son was using it to do stuff in school and my wife was using it in real estate and I wasn't even using it yet. So I actually thought maybe it's a fad, but because they were using it, I was in. Meaning I didn't need the early chat GPT wasn't for me because I do my own writing. I like Google. I didn't really, this when we were chatting. I didn't use any of the imaging stuff that you were signed up for because I had my own habits. But the people in my life around me were living on it and was helping them. So AI is inevitable. It is, and it's also disrupting many things. It's eating the internet, right? Like the AI companies are scraping the internet and repurposing it and giving you a new UI. But it's inevitable. I can't necessarily pick all the winners, but it's inevitable. Yeah. Space is now inevitable. Starlink and the way Elon has launched rocket ships and the way they're talking about energy in space is inevitable. Drone warfare, inevitable. Robots, inevitable. Is it going to be, I don't want a robot that folds towels and sweeps my floors. I want, that's not the robotics I'm looking for. But so, it's a little over my pay grade, but it's quite obvious sand becomes a chip, sand, which is plentiful, becomes a chip. Obviously, there's energy issues. So the semiconductor industry has long led the Nasdaq 100. So we're in secular boom where sand gets turned into silicon, and it is good that America is thinking through how to bring this back onshore. Right, for all the stupidity going on, we are at least thinking through this. We're dealing with the localized governments of data centers, et cetera. So there's stupidity going on there. There's going to be you know, policy stuff that matters. But that world's not as exciting to me because I'm not truly a technical person at heart. And that doesn't interest robots, aviation, drones, war, defense, just not my interest. I got lucky because I got this 30 years of passion about the markets, and now we have a new toy that's disrupting the markets, which is prediction markets. So, you know, there's something for everybody, right? But I really think if you're not going to get into these new technologies, which you have done, like aviation, drones, et cetera, and you're not in the financial markets, there's only one thing left, and that's to be in media and creativity. And that's a great thing. So if there's never been a better time to be a creator because Hollywood's been disrupted and now you've got Tubi, YouTube, Hulu, TikTok, Netflix, there's so many avenues for a creator using AI to learn a craft, right? Podcasting and Beehive just launched their whole community platform and newsletter. You can do everything from a Beehive, right? So um, it's phenomenal. So there's three categories I look at. It's creative and media, which is one and two man companies. Right? There's these e-commerce slash brands as part of that creative. Then there's the financial markets. And then there's, technology, which is no longer software. It is hardcore, you know, investments. And, as the world shrinks, all these countries are going to have to develop this stuff on their own. Well, the original Silicon Valley from the '60s to the '90s was all hardware, right? It was a little bit of software, but it was all machine and semiconductors. And, and software was always, the application layer, right, where we made all the money. What we talked about the application layer for AI is that's coming. That could be StockTwits. There's a lot of companies coming, like the verticalization of this, right? So, I'm not really thinking that much about it. I do believe we're starting to see the experts and the user, the actual use case that open source AI is gonna do most of this work, and you can see it in the way that Claude and Elon at Grok and OpenAI are kind of trying to protect themselves as these closed models with the government and offering the government to, because I think the Chinese models and models coming out of Europe and et cetera, and Japan, uh going costs matter, and if you're running a 1 and 2 person team and you got 100 agents working for you and skills and Claude skills, um, you don't want a $6,000 bill. This goes back to like like in the telephone days, there was like US West and Quest, and like you were worried about getting a $10,000 phone bill or an AOL bill. And so if you're a small business, um, the good news for small business, even if OpenAI and Anthropic went bankrupt, AI is still going to be here, right? So even if like half of these chip companies go out of business because they screw up, there's so much incentive for AI and open source models so that all these small creators, and this goes to that um, hourglass thing. The big companies are fighting this battle to win AI. It you can either be mad at the machine and yell, "Oh, these guys are criminals," but if you're in the lower half of the hourglass, you're in a great spot because the cost of AI is gonna continue to get cheaper. The cost of running agent is gonna get cheaper. So as long as you invest time in learning how to use these products, there's gonna be exponential opportunity for growth in building a small business. And I think we have to get away, when Zuckerberg was building Facebook, there was this fascination with, "I wanna build the next Facebook," right? Uh, I think young people are really gonna have to decide, like, pick their poison. They're really gonna have to, like, the world is shrinking for the first time in the sense that, you may not be welcome as an American in many places in 10 years. Um, and, and so, with digital walls, you may not be able to sell and distribute in all these places. So I think people are gonna have to learn to live more within their mean and kind of find, their path. But I think it's gonna be much harder to build a massive company, but never been easier to build a business that you get true enjoyment out of and, satisfaction and self-sustaining. Yeah. I tell young people all yeah, I tell young people all the time is, "Why do you want venture capital money? Like, what is so great about being a slave to a large capital raise," right? Now, if you wanna go do space and rockets and drones and whatever, yeah, but if you wanna start a business, that isn't in these hard tech areas, I try and talk people out of taking venture capital money, or I do take a very small amount and try to build a business that's sustainable, and you can always build a sustainable business, you can always take shots on goal and go for growth later. So, I think strategy is more important than ever. It used to be just coding that mattered because, it was free to get traffic on the internet. Now that it's expensive to get customers, I think it's much smarter to kind of figure out how to grow on your own. Yeah, I mean, Yeah, I mean, I think you can see it now with the Trump administration that it's cronyism, right? So to think that I have an edge in defense when all the best deals are being blessed at the White House, right? You got to know the reality. Like you can make fun of the game, and people can call it derangement syndrome, but the new game being played, cronyism, oligarchyism, and I think it was obvious when you saw all the Mag 7 guys at the Trump inauguration, right? Like there's a different game being played, and it's not fair, but it is. I don't know how to as a person, I don't want to lose my mind, complain about it. You've got to kind of live within what's happening within the game, and everybody gets theirs, right? Technology, it's kind of like Jurassic technology. It's very hard for the government to do this. Eventually, technology kind of works its way, and out of nowhere will come something. Look, Ukraine's got the upper hand on Russia without true U.S. help, right? More European help than U.S. help, right? If you told me that, like, also last week, what the Democrats voted that they don't want this 3 billion in aid to go to Israel. Like, if you told me that, like, Israel and the United States were not going to be friendly, I would have said you're crazy. Like, only two normal countries, right? So yeah, if you told me, and then after that, or dropped a nuke by now and, like, escalated everything, and now they're taking the war to Russia, and no, it's not pretty, and it's horrific, but out of this, Ukraine has just like Israel with their technology by fighting enemies on the ground and tanks and all this warfare and spyfare for the last 40 years, right? Out of that technology, out of young Israelis going to war or having to go in the military at 18, all that brain power developing communications and weaponry, came, same with the US military, all that technology, right? Um, so as other countries like now Europe has to rebuild their stuff, they're gonna be better at technology. Continent of Europe made just so many terrible mistakes offloading, and having bad policy and bad immigration policy, and now they're paying for it, and US is trying to, like, not have the same mistakes. Um, so, I think the world is gonna look very different. The good news is there's great infrastructure and stable coins. The good news is, you know, energy is now back on the table. Nuclear people and geothermal energy and solar energy are being taken seriously. The good news is, love him or hate him, Elon has figured out space and taken America leads in space. Same with kind of robotics, other than China. And, we make fun of the United States, but it's still just the only place to be, right? It's where the capital markets are, and we're very much protected. We're kind of screwing up our relationship with Canada, but, like, we're very much protected, and so people need to realize all that and not get themselves too negative. But at the same time, the number one thing I tell young kids is just build that muscle memory, build, chase, go build domain experience. You love the markets. If you live in the market for 20 years, you're gonna make a living. You're gonna figure it out, right? And that's kind of been my career. So I'm really happy to be 60, and I think technology is moving to be to better allocations, right? Like real hard problems. And at the same time, I have this knowledge around and my network around financial markets, and so, um, I feel very comfortable investing in that space. So it's kind of a good thing, and then I'll have less competition because all the people that, like, were competing with me have moved on into hard tech problems, So it's also a good thing, people are trying to chase new ideas all the time, and I'm like, "Well, you can't be a butterfly and float all over the place. You kinda gotta pick your spot and try and find a big market." And the financial markets are really a fantastic place to be. Yeah. Are we good? No? Are you so where were we? Where were we? Yeah, I mean, the easiest thing that I find, and most markets now have become trend markets, right? Because they're the indexes are market cap weighted, so it's its own trend following system. But if you, so I really believe in indexing and direct indexing. Most of my investing is now indexing, just because it's a trend following system and it's tax efficient. But I still love to pick stocks. So if I'm going to pick a stock, you and I always know that, like, I like to buy stocks that are doing better than all the other stocks because they do tend to have the best financials. They're always going to be overvalued, but they always have the most growth, right? And so for decades, that's been something that's been called price relative strength. Investors Business Daily, now Market Surge, kind of the creators of this program, and it works. It's fantastic. And yet, no matter how much people educate themselves, or is free for everybody to learn about this, it's a very hard strat, and very few people follow that strategy. Um, and in developing StockTwits, and having 17 years of data, I was always fascinated by, like, stocks that were breaking out to all-time highs or year highs, and no one, names I had never heard of. Right. And so over time, I noticed that those stocks, if you own them, you kind of were uncomfortable because you were wondering, why is no one talking about this company? And you were always, like, skeptical that, like, you know, that that it wasn't real, or it wasn't real, at some level. Anyways, over enough time, I started to realize with you, and get more confidence in the idea that it even happened with Apple, right? Back when Apple first broke out in 2002 and was making its comeback in 2003, Apple was hated, and they had the iPhone and the earpods, and stock was breaking out, and no one cared, right? Everybody was, had dismissed them. So I call it trends with no friends. Um, I want to find companies that are doing well. They're not being talked about, but they're doing well in both their fundamentals and their technicals. They're hitting some kind of new high, 52-week high or all-time high. And then I like to kind of put myself in that trend and think about the catalyst. And then you wait, right, until everybody's talking about it. Now, selling is harder. It's easy to buy stocks. The key to any strategy is how you sell. So in any trend following strategy, you have to make a decision of, the fundamentals don't really matter in a trend following strategy. What matters is, when do you step off the trend? And, there's many different strategies around that, but the entry strategy is what I find most interesting. If you pick good entries, you're going to make money over time. What comes down to is how greedy you are and how aggressive you are in riding the trend. And I'm not so much, uh, um, like to talk about that because everybody has a different risk strategy, but I'm very focused on finding companies that are just breaking out that not a lot of people are talking about. And it works. So that's I call it social relative strength. I'm going to find stocks with high price relative strength and have very little social relative strength. My bet being that if the company continues to execute, everybody will talk about it. And that's where we got with Micron. We've got there with drone companies, right? Like, we're getting there with companies that, like, you thought you knew what they were, so you didn't buy them, but yet demand and their fundamentals were going up, and now people are like, "Oh, I gotta own memory stocks." But, a year ago, when memory stocks were breaking out, people didn't connect them to AI and agents. They just connected it to being, well, this is a bubble. Memory stocks are going up, and we've seen this rodeo before. Now everybody's bought into the fact that, South Korea and memory stocks, and now we have like a crash going on because guess what? Everybody owns them now. So the question is, you know, what happens at the end of these trends? But at the same time, there's going to be all these new trends starting out: drones, robots. So you've got to keep your eyes peeled on the 52-week high list. Well, I mean, obviously, um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously, electric, short haul flights. I'm not a helicopter guy, but I think, yeah, I just don't know because I'm really not an expert in this space. I mean, there's been some public stocks that everybody's flooded around, Archer and Joby, and the way planes take off, and et cetera, et cetera. But I just don't know much about the industry. I think we can tell based on land prices and home prices that people are going to need to be more remote. Uh, and because face to face is as important as just being on Zoom, I think obviously, aviation's going to have, a huge boom. But there's so much government, red tape and other stuff. I mean, it's just not it's not an area that interests me, you know? It would take me too long. I think people really have well, I think people really have to kind of focus on if that's what's interesting to you. The great news, there's a huge trend going on. The hard part is just all the regulation and FAA and all that stuff that I don't know. Right now, the government's focused on def right now, the government's focused on defense and gambling, so you've gotta kinda you've gotta catch the right government political environment to make this stuff happen. I mean, I just don't fall I'll let you tell me, but I don't follow it at home, so I definitely don't follow it abroad. I would think most of the innovation will come in the US. Obviously, the drone innovation came from somewhere else because of war, but I think flight aviation, most likely comes from China doesn't even have a Boeing, they can't even create these planes. So I think the US is the place to be for this stuff. It's just a question of, who the investors are but you can see Elon and Jeff Bezos are super interested in this space, so that's good. Alright, I gotta hop. Yeah, I'll let it download here and then. Alright, buddy.